Hello and welcome to the Compassionate Men interview series. Today I'm delighted to be talking to Dr. Dan Siegel. Dr. Siegel is professor of psychiatry at the UCLA School of Medicine, but he's so much more than that. He's given, I think, 4 TED Talks, maybe 5 if you count the one with Goldie Hawn. He is author of numerous books, including the New York Times bestseller Brainstorm. He's executive director of the Mindsight Institute and pioneer in the field of interpersonal neurobiology. And there's actually a lot more than that. I really suggest you go to drdansiegel.com. I'll put that up for you guys to click on. And I'm just so happy to have the opportunity to interview this incredible man. Thank you for being here today, Dr. Siegel.
Thank you, Kozo. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So I wanted to start with some personal history. And the way I want to do this is I actually interviewed Scott Krenz, who I think you know, and he has this practice called Lifeline, where you take the major events in your life and you make them like chapter titles, and you go through just the major events in your life. And I was wondering if we could do a compassion lifeline. So if you could just go through and pick out some of the major events in your life that led to you being such a compassionate man.
Oh, well, first of all, thanks for saying such a compassionate man. I don't usually use that term for myself anyway. For other people I do, but I appreciate that. That's very kind of you. Wow, a lifeline, a lifeline. I guess I would say it would begin in my family, the first maybe dozen years of life as a child, really seeing how when compassion was there or compassion wasn't there, it made a really big difference in how people respected each other or understood each other. And there were a lot of conflicts in my family, so it was a very difficult time of feeling that challenge of when compassion wasn't there. And then I would say the second dozen years of life, if I had to put chapters on it like you're asking us to do, or me to do, I would say that my friendships with close other people, mostly males, but I had some really close female friends, not girlfriends, but friends, really taught me the importance of connection. And that connection was made rich and strong by not only understanding each other, but when someone was in a tough spot, really reaching out and supporting them, which I guess is one definition of compassion. So I learned then in my adolescence, the second dozen years of life, the importance of friendships, of compassionate communication, of understanding, of reaching out to connect, of really being someone's support system, I would say. And around that time, let's see, now we're right at the time I was in medical school, I actually decided to drop out of medical school. And this would be, I guess, the third chapter. This would be called Mindsight and Its Absence. When I was in medical school, I confronted a lot of experiences in my own journeys as a medical student where the professors didn't see the people they were working with, their patients or even their students, as people who had a kind of internal subjective experience, feelings and thoughts, meanings, narratives, intentions, hopes, dreams, longings, a sense of being alive, all that inner subjective quality that we have called the mind or mental life was kind of absent, or in some ways not even kind of. It seemed totally absent from my professor's worldview, and they treated people like they were walking bags of chemicals. And this was really, really upsetting for me. And so what I did was I dropped out of school, and I went on a journey that I thought was going to just be becoming a salmon fisherman, or I thought of being a choreographer, or all sorts of things I thought about doing. And I tried out those different things in various intense ways or almost ways. And I really became aware of that self-reflection was a very important part of this ability to see the mind, that if you didn't see your own mind, how could you see the inner mental life, the mind of someone else? So I made up this word mindsight back then. And I guess that was really for me the beginning of professionally identifying where my passion was, that I felt there must be something really central about seeing each other clearly, and honoring each other's differences and supporting each other's vulnerability. All of this I put under the word mindsight, to have insight in yourself and empathy for another person, and really a compassionate connection. And so when I went back to school, I made a decision when I wasn't going to be a salmon fisherman or a dancer or choreographer or whatever. I thought, well, I could at least finish the rest of my medical school training. So I went back to school, and the professors hadn't changed. They still, many of them, treated people like physical objects, not centers of mental life. And I just had this term in my head, mindsight, that some people had it and some people had a little bit and some people had none of it. And I should try to use the professors who didn't have it as anti-role models, as someone I didn't want to be like. So that really shaped, I guess, this next dozen years of life. I'm trying to add the numbers here. So from 1980 to, I guess, around 92. Yeah, it's working out perfectly for Scott's suggestion of chapters. So this next dozen years of life, I guess I would say integration would be the name of this chapter. And here, I guess I was around 30, my mid-30s, 36. And it became clear to me that what really was needed in the profession of mental health, because by then I was trained initially in pediatrics for 1 year, and then psychiatry, adult psychiatry, child psychiatry, adolescent psychiatry, and then research psychiatry. And then I became the training director. And this is when I was the training director. I wanted to take all the things all the ways people explored reality, in this case, the beginning with sciences like anthropology that studied culture, and sociology that studied groups, and psychology which studied our mental lives, and biology which studied our bodies, and chemistry which studied our molecules, and physics which studied the way things interacted with each other, and math that kind of had principles that held it all together. I thought there ought to be one framework that integrated all those different elements. And so I called it interpersonal neurobiology. And the next dozen years, I guess, would be the age for me, the chapter of interpersonal neurobiology, where I wanted to seek the scientific framework that could describe why compassion was one of the most important parts of being human. And mindsight would be the way you could be compassionate. You would see the inner life of someone else by knowing your own inner life. And then you'd integrate yourselves. You'd honor the differences and promote connection. So mindsight came to mean insight, empathy, and integration, those three things. Integration being honoring differences, promoting linkages, whether it's between you and me right now, or, whether it was in the brain, having left and right be different, or top and bottom, all sorts of integration. So I would guess that would be the chapter. And then the final chapter where I am right now, I suppose, would be the chapter of action. How do you turn these scientific ideas? We now have 36 textbooks in this series that I've created. I've written some books for the public too. And how do you actually turn into action? So you take the scientific foundation and turn it into change in the world. And so with people like Scott Kriens, I've done a couple of things with 1440, and we have some projects together where we're trying to basically turn these notions of mindsight into actions of compassion in the world. And that would be the pathway.
Oh, wow.
I've never done that before, so thank you.
That was beautiful. It reminds me of what you call the 3 R's that need to be implemented in education, not reading, writing, and arithmetic, but relationship, how important relationship is in your personal history. Resilience. I mean, you dropped out of med school, went to be a salmon fisherman, tried choreography, and then went back. I didn't know you went back to the same med school. So, resilience, right? And then reflection. You said this of taking mindsight and being able to look inside and reflection, and just how that your actual life journey exemplifies that, right? the importance of relationship, reflection, and resilience.
Yes, yes, and the reflection piece is sometimes hard. I know because I didn't grow up in a family where people did much reflection. As I mentioned, it was challenging to learn it, and it's easy if you're a scientifically trained person to act like the subjective world does not exist. And reflection is how we focus our attention on the subjective world of ourselves for inner reflection, or on others for compassionate reflection. So, the brain itself has these two ways of seeing reality: the physical reality, like here's this object, or the mental reality. And it's not that they're in different domains of reality; they're the same reality, but different aspects of it. So, like a head and tail of a coin, and also there's an edge of a coin. There's three aspects. There's one coin, but three aspects. Mental life is one aspect of reality, but it's very possible, if you're trained as a scientist or raised in a family like I was, to act like there is no subjective life. All your vision, all your sight is on the outside world, not on mind sight, not on the inner world.
Yeah, yeah. And I wanted to mention one other piece of that lifeline that I found just really wonderful, is that you went back and gave a talk at Harvard.
Yeah.
And your professors were sitting up in the crowd, and a lot of them, I take it, some of them were the ones who didn't have the mindsight, and they were crying, right?
Yeah, that's right. It was an amazing experience to be. Well, there were two times. One time I was asked to give the opening address to developmental neurobiology, and they asked me, of all people, to go back to that school, Harvard Medical School, at the Mass General Hospital, and there's a room called the Ether Dome. And for that event, it's a different one than one you're referring to. For that event, it was literally on I'd have to do the math, but I think it was either 15 or 25 years since I dropped out of school. Let's do it real quick. 25 years since I decided to drop out of school in that room. And they asked me to give a talk on the importance of emotions and stories in medicine, And let me just get rid of this. Hold on. And so what was really funny about it was that's the exact room I made the decision to drop out. And I was with my 15-year-old son at the time. And it was just amazing to be at that school being asked to give the opening address about the very thing that I was criticized for as a medical student, that I kept on asking my patients for the stories of their lives. I kept on asking about what they were feeling. And my professors literally, this is a quote, would say, "That's not what we do as doctors. That's not what doctors do." And so that was one thing. The meeting you're referring to was kind of amazing. I had written a book a few years after that meeting called The Mindful Brain, and I was asked to come back to the Harvard Academy of Medical Educators and to speak to them about the importance of mindfulness. One of the speakers was actually a person who I had interviewed for medical school, Ron Epstein, and I was on the committee that accepted him. So he was a few years behind me, and he actually introduced me to my girlfriend from medical school, which is kind of fun. Anyway, so Ron was there, and Ellen Langer, who's a Harvard professor who talks about a different kind of mindfulness, she was there. So for my talk, I was going to talk about my book. And I get up there, and I look in the back row, and not only was there a friend of mine, John Kabat-Zinn, who was in the back row coming to hear it, but all these now retired deans who sadly are no longer alive today, but they had retired, and I saw them in the back. They were my deans when I was in school. Dean Fetterman, Dean Tosteson, and I had this moment where I thought, I can't just give my talk on this book. So I said to them, I said, hey, I was going to give a talk on the mindful brain, and I wrote a whole book on it, and you can get the book. But I want to take this opportunity to tell you something I've never told anyone at this school before publicly, why I dropped out of medical school. And then I just told them the sad stories, the painful stories of being with patients who were just told they were going to die, and the professor walks out, being told as a medical student, don't talk to people about their feelings or the meaning of things in their lives because it's not what we do as doctors. And I couldn't stand it. I didn't want to become like that. And what John told me was those deans were crying, it just, it felt to me like the important opportunity to take advantage of, the chance to connect with them, probably something they didn't even know. And those guys may have actually had it. I don't know. I wasn't that close to them as deans, but I certainly know the dean of students, Dean Carola Eisenberg. She was unbelievably mindsightful. And she's the one, when I said, I'm dropping out of school, she said, I don't want you to drop out. I want you to take a leave of absence. I said, I'm dropping out because I don't have any intention to come back. She goes, how do you know what you are going to do in the future? And I said, well, that's the whole point. I don't know. She goes, so if you don't know, then why don't you just take a leave so you could return? I said, I never want to return to this crazy place. She said, but how do you know you don't want to return? I said, well, I don't really know. She goes, so take a leave. I said, well, what do I have to do to take a leave? She goes, just write me an essay, since this is a research medical school, about the research you're going to do on your leave of absence. I said, research? I'm just dropping out. She goes, just write an essay. I said, okay. So I said, do you have a piece of paper? She says, sure. She hands me a piece of blank paper, and I write a one-sentence essay. It says, I am going to take a year off from school. I'm going to take a leave of absence from medical school to figure out who I am, period. And I handed it to her. She said, perfect.
No way. That is class.
It was so amazing. And I went to the registrar, Noreen Kohler, who, interesting how everything is interconnected. She had a house right next to John Kabat-Zinn's in New England. It was really very funny because I mentioned this story to him once and he told me about her. Anyway, so I go to Noreen Kohler. This is 1978, 79, when I was in school. I was dropping out in 1980, I guess. And so I go to Noreen Kohler, the registrar. She had taken this stance. They wanted to put computers in the registration office at Harvard Medical School. And Noreen, who had been there forever, said, if you put a computer in this office, I am quitting, because this must be a personal experience. She was like the only person making it personal. So when I went to drop out of school to take my leave of absence, she comes out of her office. She says, I hear you're taking a leave of absence. I said, well, I'm dropping out. She goes, well, whatever. She goes, you need to promise me something. She looks me in the eye. I said, what do I need to promise you? She goes, you need to promise me that if you ever think about coming back here, you feel it, that you are ready to be back here, and then you call me up, and then we'll take you back. Wow. She was like the heart of the place.
Wow.
And it was so interesting before the digital age took over that she was so interested in making sure things were face to face, that even the paperwork, when any human being was dealing with another human being and it was on paper, at least you had the feeling like I'm writing it down with my body. At least it was somewhat embodied.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a beautiful thing. So I went back and told Noreen I'm ready to come back. She said, okay. Look me in the eye and tell me that.
That's beautiful. And I love how John Kabat-Zinn kind of weaves his way in there, right?
It was very funny. I mean, what was really incredible is this was exactly the year that I was struggling so much that John was starting the mindfulness-based stress reduction thing. And if I had just gone a few dozen miles to the west of where I was and connected with him, and although then I probably was so into just being on a journey of absolute discovery, I probably didn't want anyone who was organized. Because even Barry Brazelton had offered me a job when I told him what I was doing. But in the end, we met in his office and he goes, I think you have much bigger ideas than what I do with infants. You should probably go out and just figure things out for yourself. And it was good advice. It was really good advice.
Yeah, it formed who you are. That's beautiful. That's a great story.
Yeah, well, when you're traveling around, because I was traveling on a train and traveling around other ways too, every moment when there's nothing structured for you, and I think this is true, a lot of people go through school without ever taking a break, because I had never taken a break. Every day you wake up, I'd saved enough money to do this, you wake up and you go, who am I? Why am I here? What am I going to do? Okay, I feel hunger, I eat food, but now what do I do? When I interact with people, how am I choosing to interact? When I'm going in this direction or that direction, what is it about the directions and me that I chose to do that? Why am I living? What's the whole thing about? And being in the present moment, although I didn't know this term mindfulness or anything like that, but being present for life like that,
Yeah.
without all the expectations from other people that you internalize yourself, gives you this spaciousness of being that I think I desperately needed, and just interacting with people as I went along the path, and when you're open like that and receptive, like I was hitchhiking in Vancouver Island to go to my spot to try being a salmon fisherman, and we got picked up by a trucker, and so we're driving along and through Vancouver Island. He says, "What's your story?" And I said, "Oh, I used to be in medical school. I dropped out." And he goes, "Oh, you dropped out of medical school?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to become a salmon fisherman." He goes, "Well, that's amazing." I said, "What's amazing about that?" He goes, "I am a salmon fisherman." I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, and I'm dropping out to go study psychology and become a psychology professor." For real. I'm trying to find that guy. And so we're driving along, driving along. I said, "Why in the world would you drop out of being a salmon fisherman?" And he says, "Let me tell you." And he tells me the unbelievably difficult life they had of waking up at 4 in the morning, leaning over all the time while this rod, pulling it in, pulling it in. He said he's so bent over now, he can't even stand up straight to play tennis.
Oh, wow.
He said it's ruining his body, and he doesn't know if he'll ever get his body back. And I was a dancer, at the time, and the last thing I needed to be was like angled like this. My knees were already bent. So I thought, oh my God, you just saved me a long set of years of disillusion.
Beautiful.
So we have to be open to the universe and see what it's going to deliver to us,
Yeah, and I love how reflection is a part of that, right? And
Totally.
yeah, that's oh, that's a story for a lifetime,
Yeah.
Dan. You need to have another book, just an autobiography.
Yeah, I don't think people are too interested in that, but it's fun to talk to you about it in this kind of informal way.
So you mentioned your son, and I wanted to pick up something there. In one of your TED Talks, you talk about how when your son was an infant, when he'd cry, you'd comfort him. But then when he'd keep crying, you'd comfort him some more, and then he'd keep crying, and you'd get upset. And you connect this, what I call aversion with helplessness, with a previous experience you had caring for helpless children as an intern. And I know a lot of men, myself included, experience this aversion to helplessness. And I'm wondering, could this be a gender issue? And then a secondary question is, why do you think you were able to make this realization when so many fathers over the centuries haven't been able to see that? I mean, I know, my father, and you could go down the lines of, we just have this aversion to helplessness, like pull yourself up by the bootstrap, toughen up. Like when we see helplessness, we don't comfort, we almost get angry and confront.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, that's a really powerful question, and the way you articulate these questions is so illuminating. So I just want you to keep on asking me questions so I can learn. Wow. Well, I guess I would say this. I would say it's a struggle. I think for myself, as I mentioned, I think in I guess it was Parenting from the Inside Out, where I first bring it up. These moments when I couldn't comfort him after he'd initially be comforted, and then he'd get a little more agitated, like any infant could. Once I would start getting agitated, that he was still distressed, even though I did at that point whatever I could. Let me turn this down a little bit. Even though it happened like that, I think the feeling inside of me that gets arising is powerlessness, right? So, which is kind of the same as helplessness. And that powerless feeling, on some deep level, maybe it's for male or female. I don't know, because I know females that have the same issue, but maybe they deal with it differently. So maybe for us as men, it has a different kind of aggression that comes with it. But when you're feeling powerless, it's like a life threat. So even though this baby boy in my arms is not going to kill me, the helplessness I feel because I can't comfort him, and the powerlessness that my brain is experiencing because I can't effectively help him, that powerlessness has a feeling in all of our evolutionary history, especially maybe as men, as equivalent to we're in danger of being killed. So when you're in danger of being killed, you activate one of four systems: fighting back, fleeing, running away, freezing, meaning tighten your muscles, or fainting, meaning you just collapse. Fight, flee, freeze, or faint. So depending on our temperament, maybe depending on our gender, but certainly, for any of us, it's true. If powerlessness and its association with your being threatened takes you from a receptive state where you're open and connecting to a reactive state, and that any of those reactive states go to fight, flight, freeze, or faint, if you don't have a reflective ability, what I call mindsight, if you can't look inside, and I love this phrase, but no one seems to love it, so I say it, but people at my office think I'm nuts. I love the phrase, see inside the sea inside. I just love that. People roll at my office, they roll their eyes, they say, that is dumb, but I love it. And so it's my trademark phrase, but no one else likes it around, but I like it. So at that moment, you have to see, SEE, inside, the C, SEA, inside. And you say, what's going on with me? Now, not in the moment of interacting with your kid, which I try to describe in the book, I couldn't do. But to see inside, the see inside means, I go, whoa, I'm feeling really threatened by this continuing agitation of my son. And if I understand that me being threatened takes me from receptivity to reactivity, and once I'm in reactivity, I can't parent well because I want to fight him, flee from him, freeze and do nothing, or totally collapse in helplessness. Any of those are not effective parenting things. And of course, then I get mad at myself for wanting to fight, flee, freeze, or faint. And that just creates even more reactivity. So I think part of the whole journey of reflection is the key to part of the answer, to be open to your own experience, to be able to say what it actually is rather than cling to what you wish it would be. And for me, I'm trained in pediatrics. I was board certified as a child psychiatrist. I was at the time an attachment researcher. So of all people who could soothe their son, this dude should be able to do it. And I couldn't. So I'm mad at myself, right? I'm pissed off at myself. And then I get pissed off at my son for making me so helpless, So none of it is particularly helpful. But if we can be kind to ourselves and say, that's just what's happening is happening. I'm present with what's happening. Then there's a chance of reflecting on it and doing something about it, which I try to describe in the book. And in other experiences, also with my son, when he's a little older, I get mad at him for not sharing with his sister or whatever. And I had him read the book before I turned it in. And I said, okay, I want you to read this, make sure it's accurate. So he reads it. He goes, yeah, this is accurate. I said, okay, what do you think? He goes, well, it's accurate. He goes, but I'm confused. Why would you put this in a book? Because you look like a jerk. And I said, well, I'm glad it's accurate, and I'm glad I look like a jerk because I was a jerk. But any parent can act like a jerk, and even if you write books on the subject. So it's important for us all to be supportive of each other, both of each other and of ourselves, because life is hard and being a human is really tough. I mean, it's the toughest job I think any of us will have, is just being a human on the planet. So anyway, that's what I told him.
Yeah. And you're giving us license. I have two sons. You're giving us license as parents to make mistakes as well, because I'm not a board certified child psychologist. I didn't study attachment theory. Of course the average parent is going to make these same mistakes if board certified child psychologists still have that reactivity. It's exactly. Like you said, it's in our reptilian brain. It's part of who we are.
Totally. So. And then if we can be kind to ourselves by understanding that, then you can go back and make a repair with yourself and a repair with your child. And I even do that in the Brainstorm book. My son is now 24, and I talk about just like a year ago, some interactions we had that didn't turn out so well, and I put it in the book, and he said, oh, there you go again, putting yourself looking like a jerk. I get, yeah, because this just was it's what we do as parents. We specialize in goofing up.
Yeah. That's yeah. And that vulnerability, I talked to Scott Krenz about this, that vulnerability and that authenticity, right? That you are telling something that of what you want to say, not what you want the other person to think about you. That
Yeah.
authenticity brings that relationship closer, brings brings that love into the picture, I think.
It is love. It's exactly the word. It's love. And, you know, I think we're always filled with messages from the world about how to do this or do that or be perfect or whatever. I think the more we can just be honest and be present in what's really happening, the better world we're going to have, the better inside world we're going to have, the better relational world we're going to have. So, you know, we have to support each other in that, because you always feel nervous. You know, like when my son said, "Oh, you look like a jerk," you know, I mean, I appreciate that, but I know from being a parent, it's really hard and you goof up all the time, you know, and it's really easy to be hard on yourself. And we have to really take care of ourselves personally and take care of ourselves relationally. And so that's, you know, the good news about that is when we do that for each other, it's like, I think of it like candlelight. And this is where, you know, it's like what you said about love. You know, if you're a candle and you have your wick that's lit, and there's another candle that's not lit, and you light the other candle, and then you've got two candles that are lit, you lighting another candle doesn't take anything away from your light. It just brings more light into the world. And I really think we need to try to bring that kind of stance. You know, some people use the word empathic joy, where we get joy out of other people's joy. We appreciate lighting other people's candles. It's not going to take anything away from us. It's just going to support a really positive world. And the same thing is true with compassion. You know, the more we are compassionate with ourselves, the more we can be compassionate with other people. Just think about what a world that would be if actually everyone's kind to each other. And I talk about kindness as being a way we honor and support each other's vulnerabilities, so you can be just yourself no matter what you think the expectations are. You can just be who you actually are.
Yeah, yeah, and actually that's perfect of a question I wanted to ask you. And this is something I notice, Dr. Siegel, and the
You
talk.
can call me Dan, by the way.
All right, Dan. This is something I noticed in the talk at Spirit Rock, and I also noticed in your TED Talk. So you're giving a talk in front of a few hundred, I don't know, more than a few hundred people, and you're giving your TED Talk, and somebody sneezes, and you stop your talk and you go, "Oh, bless you." You know, and I thought when I first saw that, I'm like, well, that's very, very courteous, you know. But then, you know, you did it at Spirit Rock, and you got to the point where you're like, okay, I'm gonna bless everybody now, because if I stop every single time for when someone sneezes or something, that we won't get through this talk. And I know in the Mindful Therapist you talk about the importance of attunement, and I just see this. Well, you have this attunement where it's not just attunement with like you and I in this conversation, but it's an attunement with a large group of people, with all different things, climate change. We can talk about the Garrison Institute, and so my question is this attunement that you have, this like larger attunement, is this something that you've always had? Were you always like kind of aware of others, very empathic and attuned to them? Or is this something that you've deepened into and that you've developed as a skill? And if so, how can we also become that attuned?
I think, you know, there's different things I could point out. I would say that different ways of coming to feel that the self, the SELF, as well as the mind, even though science today may argue that the self and the mind, you know, come from, you know, in a very simplistic way, scientists say it comes from the activity of your brain and your head. Well, I actually think that's only part of the truth. And maybe it's because I'm also a clinician, you know, and I work as a psychotherapist. But the mind and the self that emerges from it, I believe, is both embodied, so it's not just up in the head, it's through the whole body, but it's also relational. So in that sense, we have a distributed self, that the self is not limited to your skin. It's actually like between me and you right now and anyone that's listening. And so I feel in my body the relational depths of our distributed nature. So when I look at you, I actually don't look at you as a separate self. I kind of think of ourselves and experience, not just think, but I feel and experience and perceive each of these bodies we live in as kind of nodes, if you will, little points of a distributed network that is kind of selfing itself. It's emerging as more like a verb. So the you are emerging in the self and this body is your self, it's my self. That's not a separate. I don't know how to describe it except with words, but it's a distributed self is just one way to phrase it. So in that sense, if I'm giving a TED talk or when I kind of talk and someone sneezes, at that moment, the sneeze is a part of what's happening in the self that's emerging in that moment. So the only natural thing to do in my experience of that moment, since a part of the self has sneezed, is to say, God bless you, or Gesundheit, or whatever.
So, a number of times in this interview, you've mentioned your family, and I was wondering if we could go there. I was wondering if we could talk about your father.
My father.
Yeah.
Okay.
And at Spirit Rock, you mentioned that your father was very rigid, which allowed you to push off in adolescence. And I also noticed that you dedicated Brainstorm to your children, your wife, and your mother, but your father was left out there. And I'm wondering, what is your relationship with your father, and how did it affect you becoming or being a compassionate man?
So, at this very moment inside of my body right now, I got to be honest with you, I'm having a little bit of debate, because I've never publicly talked too much about my dad, mostly because when he was alive, I didn't want to hurt his feelings. And now that he's gone, that's not going to happen. And I've gotten permission from my mother to actually talk about him. I wanted her permission because she has a lot of colleagues who are in the mental health field, and I didn't want to ever make her feel awkward. So I've gotten her permission. So I'll just say this, my father was an extremely challenging person to have as a father. He was a person filled with emotions, but no compassion, which is a strange combination. He was really sensitive to your emotional state, but would use it against you. So it wasn't like he was a classic engineer, and he was an engineer. He's so insensitive and clueless. No, he was very tuned in using the term responsive to your emotional state, but not in a positive way. So that became a very painful and frightening way to live in a family. And so I didn't learn any compassion from him, except like with my professors in medicine, when I got older, to use him as the role model, the anti-role model of how not to be as a father. And maybe I went too far to the extreme because, in writing all these books, I've never missed a second with any of my children, ever. The first book I wrote between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. before they woke up. I am incredibly dedicated to them. When they were younger, my friends thought I was nuts, but it was just the way I wanted to be, because that never happened with my father. And so, maybe it went too far, but I don't think so. I mean, I just went traveling in the rainforest with my 24-year-old son, and I felt so happy with our relationship, so connected with him, so thrilled with who he's becoming, so just filled with joy about everything about him. And so I don't think I went to the other extreme, but I was very present. And, it's challenging as a parent because of what we talked about earlier, especially as your kids get to be adolescents and then start moving away. If you feel so caring for their experience, when they're in trouble with their friends or difficulty with some issue, it just takes over your day, and it's hard to do other things. If you're a therapist, you got to really clear your mind. And so I guess part of my professional journey has been to learn about the things I never got from my family. And part of, I guess, why I wrote Developing Mind. I've never said this publicly, but at this point, I don't think I should have said this back, 15 years ago, but I'm fine to say it now. I was really trying to understand from a scientific point of view what was missing in my family. And even though I would give that to my father and ask him to read it and have long, long walks with him, and in the end, he would just say, I hear the words you're saying, but it's a bunch of psychological gobbledygook. I say, well, no, you know, there is a way to relate to someone where you try to understand their experience. He goes, that's just nonsense. He would literally just say that. He probably had some absence of the compassion circuitry in his brain. I mean, he literally, it's hard to say this, but I mean, he literally just showed no evidence of the ability to put himself in another person's mental experience.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's pretty painful. And I think it was painful for everybody.
Yeah. And you know, I'd mentioned that your father wasn't unique. You know what I mean? It wasn't like he was the only man in that generation to lack compassion. You know, like it's pretty. I'm writing this book called Raising Compassionate Boys, and it's specifically based on that. And the more and more research I do on it, the more I find that, you know, the reason why there's this whole line of lack of compassion that is kind of extended into boys specifically.
It's so sad.
Yeah. And actually that's perfect for the next question I want to ask you is you actually talk about, at one of your talks, you talk about how culture shapes epigenetic influence on gene expression.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you think about what Dan Kinlan and Michael Thompson in their book Raising Cain talk about the culture of cruelty that boys go through while being raised, that there is this cultural imperative that separates boys from compassion, or to use your phrase, shuts off the circuits of compassion. And if so, how can we change that?
Well, I think we're changing it right now in this conversation you're asking me to participate in. And just, you know, there's a phrase I like to use because it's simple to remember. So, you know, I made it up to make our memories easier, these acronyms. But this one's just name it to tame it, you know. And so if we name compassion, if we name how cruelty is kind of an absence of compassion, how we look at the science that shows that when you're compassionate, it actually improves your epigenetic regulation of genes that actually prevent, you know, illnesses, inflammatory illnesses like diabetes and other illnesses. Being present, you know, for each other, being present, that has been shown to actually change the enzyme telomerase that repairs the ends of your chromosomes. All these things we now know from science. Then you say to someone who would say, oh, compassion, that doesn't make any sense. You say, well, guess what? The absence of compassion leads to problems with the ends of your chromosomes and problems with the part of your genome that's going to prevent disease. So even if you just want to be selfish about it, you should be compassionate because you're selfish, because it's going to improve your ends of your chromosomes and your epigenetic control to prevent disease in your body. So, I mean, that's at the extreme. The other side of it is just the feeling of being connected. It just feels good. Now, what does it mean? It means you're vulnerable. It means you care. It means you are putting someone else's mental experience inside of you. So in that sense, you're vulnerable because you can't control someone else's mental experience. So if you really care about someone else and feel their inner life, you are saying, I am going to embrace uncertainty. And my daughter and I actually just wrote a chapter for Ellen Langer's textbook on mindfulness. And it just came out. And if you read it, there's a cool chapter. We think it's cool anyway. We put together this chapter on how mindfulness can be seen as the way we embrace uncertainty and we thrive with uncertainty. And in that way, if you think about compassion, the relationship between compassion and uncertainty, like for my dad, I think my dad grew up in the Depression era, right? He was born in 1923. You know, he was a young boy in the Depression. His father was unemployed. Uncertainty was the enemy. So everything that went on in his life was about avoiding uncertainty. Well, compassion is built on uncertainty. You say, I'm going to care about you, but I can't control you. Oh my gosh, I am going to have to live with uncertainty because I can't control you, but I care about you. It's that simple. If you try to control everything like a poor kid raised in the Depression might need to do, or, then it was World War II and he was in the army and, all the things that happened there and all the people being murdered and slaughtered. And, we were from Russian descent. I think was it 20 or 30 million Russians were killed. We have a Jewish history, 6 million Jews were killed. I mean, so either way you cut it, our people were being terminated in Europe when he was an adolescent. So I can understand, his desperate need to control things. So if you look at control and compassion, they don't go together at all, really. If you're a control freak, how can you care about someone else's inner life that you cannot control? So I think when I try to understand my dad, and even talking to you about it helps me clarify some of the issues, you can kind of see his desperate fear of uncertainty because it meant death, it meant disillusionment, it meant really whatever his father felt about being an unemployed person throughout all those Depression years. I mean, the last thing my father would want to do is be uncertain about anything. So, you can't be compassionate and be terrified of uncertainty.
Yeah, that's a great connection, Dan, with compassion and uncertainty. It reminds me of Krishnamurti's book, Freedom from the Known, right? That you can't get to that place of presence in the present moment and connectedness with all beings if you're holding on to anything, if you're gripping onto anything, whether it's your nation, your culture, your gender, your religion. You have to have that openness to the unknown. And
totally.
I think that's an important point. And I wanted to add in one of my favorite quotes from you, just for our listeners, is that you argue that as far as we know, scientific research proves that compassion and kindness are as important to the brain as the breath is for the body, right?
Absolutely.
And
that's right.
Yeah, that it's not only better for your bodily health, it's better for your happiness and psychological, and it's also better for well-being and relationships, obviously.
Totally. And at our website, drdansiegel.com, we have this resource we give out to people called the Wheel of Awareness.
Yeah.
And in the hub of that wheel is represented this receptive awareness. The rim represents anything you can be aware of. In many ways, the rim represents the things we can be certain about in life. Mm-hmm. So when you do the Wheel of Awareness practice, and I have this workshop I do called Soul and Synapse, to look at the connection between this receptive, open spaciousness of the hub, and not only letting go of the certainty of the rim, but embracing uncertainty, which opens you up to a whole sense of spiritual connection in the sense of knowing we're a distributed self. Mm-hmm. Because once you come to feel at ease with the hub, which this practice can let you do, suddenly everything starts to expand. And you realize, okay, I don't have to control things. I just need to be present for things. And I wish I could have given my dad that lesson.
Wow. Yeah.
I think he was too frightened to do that. My mom is we're doing a Soul and Synapse in New York, and my mom, is going to come and bring her cousin who's her age, and, it's going to be beautiful. And because, as we all get older and face the uncertainty of dying and everything like that, we can do it fully present. And if we're in the hub, we say, okay, this is all a distributed thing. If we're lucky, we get 100 years on the planet. And then, how you actually maintain this positive, connected way of being is an art you can develop.
Yeah. And I was actually going to ask you about that. And I'm glad you bring it up because I want to mention that Dr. Siegel gives this Wheel of Awareness practice away for free. Yeah. On his website. You just go to drdansiegel.com, click on resources, and he'll give you 4 versions of the Wheel of Awareness practices, like guided meditation, and for free for anybody, and I mean, I think that's wonderful in itself. But I wanted to talk about when you turn that spoke of awareness back in on itself, back towards the hub, and you talk about, I know in some of your talks you talk about how when you do this with a large audience, you do this guided meditation, then you turn that wheel back. that they get this transformation, this transcendence, this sense of awe, and the sense of connectedness. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because I think that that's so relevant right now. And I'm thinking of your Garrison Institute talks, where if we just think about self now as all by ourselves, just me, Kozo, all by myself, as not interconnected, we're doomed.
That's right.
We're doomed. So we need that interconnectedness. And I wonder if you could talk about how, when you turn that spoken back onto awareness, how that interconnectedness comes, and some of the reports people have told you about of when they do it.
Yeah, well, this is the amazing thing. We've had about now 500,000 people download that wheel. So my financial advisors say, that's really dumb. You should start charging $1 for it so you can support your institute, like an app or something for 99 cents. So anyway, but we just felt like everyone could benefit, so everyone should get it. But yeah, so the idea is, and I talk a lot about this in a book called The Pocket Guide to Interpersonal Neurobiology, and also even The Mindful Therapist, what the scientific explanation of this is. But from a practice point of view, it's just like you're saying. During the wheel, you practice, you move the spoke of attention around the rim. And then at some point, especially in advanced practice, you bend the spoke around so it goes right into the hub itself. And people who've never meditated before in their lives, or even people who've been meditating for decades, get an experience for the first time, either case, of, oh my gosh, we're all interconnected. And it's not just they think it, they experience it. And then they're not the same. I mean, really, deep change comes from the kind of transformation of perception, that you experience fully this different reality. Now, the reality may have been there all the time, but if your perceptual system gives you what Einstein called the optical delusion of separateness, then you live your whole life like that. So while interconnectedness may be a reality, we need to make sure our perceptual system appreciates it, if you will, or sees it, right? So when people do the wheel practice, what they've described, this has been now, I've given it directly to, I think, about 15,000 people in person. And so I have these experiences all around the world, from different cultures, different genders, different ages, different educational backgrounds. It doesn't matter. When people have the experience, no matter what their meditation background is, they describe this relaxing of a sense of the self being in your body, not a loss of the self, but an expansion of the self, not an emptying of the mind, but a clarity of the mind, so that you start experiencing in your perceptual moment-to-moment reality the interconnectedness that we have. And this comes back to the question you said, how do you develop this? I do the wheel every morning, and built into it is this turning the spoke into the hub. And so you're training yourself to relax from the pull of the rim, where certainty lies, to become really familiar with, and therefore ultimately comfortable with, and therefore thriving with, the uncertainty of being receptive. And so in that spaciousness of uncertainty that the hub represents in the practice, and in another way I talk about something called the plane of possibility, where I talk about a scientific interpretation of the experiential practice of the wheel, what you get there is an explanation of why that works like that, what's going on. And, in the soul and synapse approach, I'm going to talk about the relation of science and spirituality, because what we want to do is not have these two fields be so different, but actually realize they can be linked seamlessly together.
So you mentioned that you do the wheel of awareness practice every morning. And
yes.
I know the Dalai Lama meditates for 4 hours every morning on compassion, right? And I have my own contemplative practices, but I meet so many people and they're like, I'm so busy. I don't know how you find the time to meditate. I don't know how you find the time to do any of the practices that you do, right? And so I'm trying to come up with this kind of like distilled down compassion practice that people can do in their daily lives and cultivate compassion like one drop at a time. And I actually took something from you and I combined it with something from Dacher Keltner. So Dacher Keltner's research at UC Berkeley on touch, and also his research with Emiliana Simon Thomas on the sound of compassion. And they found that there's no face expression universal facial expression for compassion, but there is a sound of compassion, and it's like, ah, ah. So what I do is I combine that with your exercise of putting one hand on the heart, one hand on the belly, which activates the parasympathetic, and then also that vagus nerve, and just, and if people can just do that,
That's
yeah,
nice.
just do that a
Uh,
couple times a day. You know, when your kid does something very generous, but then also when your kid is crying and you can't comfort them, put your hand on your chest and your heart. Compassion
that's
for
nice. I
yourself.
like that.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if you see that as a practice that will cultivate compassion either with your scientific background or also
Yeah,
your
well,
spiritual background.
it's interesting because the one little study I did of me, use this one subject of this practice of one on your chest and one on your belly, when I wired myself up at a lab, it showed that, because some people are left on top, some people are right on top people, and someone's got to get a PhD on that. It'll be so cool to see why some are left and some are right. But in any event, I'm a left hand on top person. When I do my right hand on top, the one that doesn't feel so good, my sympathetic and parasympathetic system are not coordinated and balanced. And you can show that through what's something called heart rate variability. In this HRV, heart rate variability, is incoherent. So it shows the parasympathetic and sympathetic systems are not coordinated and balanced. They're not integrated. When I put my left hand on top, the whole system, my whole system, not only feels differently subjectively, I feel that ease and calm and connectedness, but I'm integrated. So what I think this does, and I think compassion is all about this, we talk about a process called integration, called the linkage of differentiated parts. And I believe deeply that kindness and compassion are integration made visible. So anything we can do, like this beautiful combo you have of Dacker's and my thing, or Emiliano's thing, where you do this and do I'll bet that's integrating your system. The more integrated we can get, the more differentiated and linked we can get internally, the more integrated we can get interpersonally, which is basically where compassion comes from. So anything, if someone can do that a few moments a day, that's really good. It's a good start. And, Barb Fredrickson has shown some beautiful work, being inspired by Sharon Salzberg, with this notion that doing loving kindness meditation is really good for your body and your brain and everything. I think it's a thing of integration. Barb Fredrickson and I just did this wonderful workshop together. Wonderful for me because I had never taught with her before. I think the participants liked it too, but it was really cool because we combined the notion of integration with the notion of what she calls positivity resonance, which is her definition of love. She talks about it in a book called Love 2.0. And so it's really cool. And I think, I do think that would be a really nice thing for people to feel and experience, and if they want to get more sophisticated, they can do loving kindness ones. That's sort of built into the wheel practice. And in the wheel, in 20 minutes, you get basically focusing on the sensations. You get a body scan, you get an exploration of the mind, you get an exploration of loving kindness and connectedness, and you get an exploration of the spaciousness of awareness, all in one 20-minute practice. And I even have a new 15-minute, speedy version.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great. And I think that's a great place to end, is that, this differences, but also linkages, right?
Yeah.
Differences and linkages. And I think, compassion is based on that. I think global relationships, that's important. And I think what you're pointing out, that in our body, that integration in our body, in our mind, in our relationships is not only going to make us happier, but I believe it's going to save the world.
I believe so too. And with the work you're doing, and we all can participate together, I think we can really do it. I'd love to think of an integrated self that can do that as not only me, but also we. And you put them together, you get we.
Yeah.
And that way you can honor your body and know you've got a personal, separate, individual history and body you got to take care of and understand. But then you have a connectedness that's a we, and you don't need to have one or the other. You put them together, you got a we.
Yeah.
So I think together we can do it.
We can do it. Yeah. Let's end on that, Dr. Dan. So thank you so much
Thank you. This was really great. Really a
for
pleasure.
all you're doing. And I want you to make your appointment, but like, I just want to mention drdansiegel.com, and I'll put the link up there. Go there, people. Like, it's full of so much free stuff, but it's also a gateway into all the amazing things you're doing, Dan, and I thank you for that. So thank you for
Thank
this
you.
and thank you for that.
Oh, a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Great. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.
Okay, Dan.
Bye.
Bye.